I feel like in the industry, in order to become a classic, classy watch, you kind of need to hit three categories. The first one being quality. Your watch needs to be of a standard that is recognized universally as a brilliant watch. Secondly is rarity. How many of your watches are produced a year? Is this something that is going to be very limited to a select few people, or is everyone and their dog going to have this watch? And thirdly is timelessness. Is this a classy, classic design that will live well past me, that will live through the ages, that can be handed down through the generations? And I think on reflection of having these three watches in the studio, every single category is hit and more. Welcome back to the Chisholm Hunter channel. My name is Harrison, as always. And before we start this video, if you could do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button to help a fellow watch nerd out, I'd really appreciate it. Today, we're going to be talking about a brand that I feel doesn't get enough recognition in the industry. And that brand is JLC. Let's just call them JLC to make it easy for me. So JLC actually have an annual production of around about 40 to 60,000 watches. And just to put that into perspective, Rolex, the best brand in the world, the brand that everyone talks about when they first get into watches, produce about 1.2 million watches a year. So there you have rarity, and not just rarity in the limited editions, rarity amongst everything. When it comes to dress and elegance, as everyone knows, in JLC's arsenal, you have the Reverso. It is the watch that put JLC on the map. It's the watch that everyone talks about. But there is a watch that's coming up in the ranks, that's climbing. Year after year, you see more and more and more of it because it's brilliant, and it is the Polaris. In 1953, the first Blancpain 50 Fathoms was born. And after that, in 1954, the first Rolex Submariner was born. And a couple of years later, in 1959, the first diving watch from Jaeger was born, but there was a couple of kind of cool tweaks to it. It was the first watch of all the divers released in this time with an underwater functioning alarm. Only 1,061 pieces were made, and the watch bore the deep sea alarm name, reference E857. This watch was in essence a Polaris, but just didn't have the Polaris name. And in 1963, officially, the Polaris was then released. Now, in 1963, it was actually marketed as a watch for men in action, thus being the more rugged sports watch of JLC's arsenal. Now, I actually got hands-on with three different Polarises, but there was one specifically that was my favorite. So firstly, I got hands-on with the Polaris chronograph with this beautiful blue dial. And honestly, the complications in this thing were epic. I mean, not as epic as the full gold one, which we'll move on to in a second, but seriously, the move, it's just genius. Secondly was the more simplistic, and in my opinion, more popular Polaris date. This is the kind of stripped down version a little bit that is a bit more basic, but still just as handsome. And then there was this, the Polaris Perpetual Calendar in pink gold. Oh my God, it's beautiful. Let's just hone in specifically on the Polaris date, because I think that's going to be the most popular watch in the kind of Polaris arsenal, and the others are a little bit more complicated, so I'll probably save them for another video. The Polaris date comes in at 42 millimeters in diameter and 13.92 millimeters in thickness. It's water resistant to 20 bar, of course has sapphire crystal glass, is in full stainless steel if that's the model you choose, and it also has a beautiful open caseback revealing that movement. It has the iconic double crowns on the right-hand side, and one of them moves the internal bezel, which is just such a cool little flair that they've kept there, that, if I'm honest, I would kind of struggle with because my ADHD would flare up and I'd just be sitting there and moving it the whole time, but it's still really cool. It has a rubber strap, which must be one of the most comfortable rubber straps I've ever tried. And it also it injects a little bit more sportiness. It injects a little bit more ruggedness into this watch. I feel like when you have a bracelet, you're definitely a lot more scared to scratch it. Scratches aren't necessarily a bad thing, but you would be more scared to scratch it. Whereas a rubber strap kind of gets rid of that issue. Plus, you can always switch the rubber strap for the bracelet if you want to dress it up. The movement on this watch, however, is where it really stands out. This is the JLC Caliber 899, an automatic winding movement with 218 components that beats at 28,800 VPH. It has 32 jewels, one barrel, comes in a thickness of 4.64 millimeters, and it has a power reserve of 70 hours. All of that is crammed in to like 4.5-ish millimeters. All of it. That is high horology at its core. This thing is just beautiful to look at. It's mesmerizing. You do have a couple of dial variants to choose between of this watch, but the one that we had specifically has this beautiful gradient running through it. It runs and bleeds into the I was going to say corners, but it's a circular watch. It bleeds into the outer sphere of the dial, and it honestly is one of the most beautiful dials I've ever seen. It's comparable with the Vacheron Constantin overseas, in my opinion. It has some orange flares on that dial, which gives it some personality, some oomph. It's kind of discreet, but still draws the eye. The thing about classy people, the thing about the people that get the attention is normally they don't speak too much. Normally it's the quiet ones that you value their opinion more because their words are harder to come by. They kind of draw the attention of the room, and I kind of feel this is what this watch does. Not that many people will recognize that it's a JLC, but a lot of people will recognize if you've got a Rolex on. This doesn't shout too loud, but it still draws the eye. It still has that rarity aspect. It still has that quality aspect, and it can still be handed down through the generations. And I know I've just honed in on one of these watches, but to be honest, all of them are just as good as each other. Not to mention the perpetual calendar. That thing is just disgustingly beautiful. So yeah, I think this is probably the classiest watch brand, if not the watch line, in the industry at the moment. And apologies for the short video. I'm very jet lagged. I just got back from LA. It was a 12-hour flight, and my time clocks are just everywhere at the moment. But I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys very soon.